In public, Sharon Osbourne was fire-sharp, witty, untouchable. In private, she was a woman stripped bare by chemotherapy, by endless fear, by the shadow of death. Cancer nearly took her life, but she clawed her way back, scarred but standing. Then came the tragedy she could not fight. Ozzy's silence, a loss so devastating it shattered the very strength that had carried her through every storm. What really happened to Sharon after surviving one war, only to lose the love that gave her reason to live? In 2002, Sharon Osbourne stood at the pinnacle of fame. The Osbournes had exploded into a worldwide sensation, turning her family into household names and cementing her as more than just Ozzy's wife. She was the witty, fearless matriarch who could manage chaos and still make it entertaining. But just as the cameras captured her sharp comebacks and laughter, doctors delivered news that shattered her world. She had stage 3 colon cancer. For many, such a diagnosis would have been a death sentence. But Sharon's first instinct was not surrender, it was fight. She listened as doctors outlined her chances. The grueling months of chemotherapy ahead, the surgeries that would tear her body apart. Instead of breaking, she looked them in the eye and asked the only question that mattered: what do I need to do to survive? That simple response revealed the core of who she was. No matter how brutal the odds, Sharon was determined to fight back. Not for fame, not for the cameras, but for her children and for the life she refused to let go of. The world never saw the fear that struck her in those first moments. What they saw was the Iron Woman who returned to set, who kept her family moving forward, who refused to let cancer write the final chapter of her story. Sharon carried the weight of her diagnosis like a secret weapon, choosing to stand tall in public while waging war in private. It was in that moment, facing death with unflinching defiance, that she proved her strength was not just an image, it was her essence. When the diagnosis sank in, Sharon's world tilted, but she refused to let anyone see her stumble. To the cameras, she was still quick with her words, witty and sharp, the mother who kept her family from falling apart. In private, though, the weight was unbearable. She lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the thought that her children might soon grow up without her. Fear pressed against her chest, but instead of letting it crush her, Sharon used it as fuel. She decided almost immediately that she would not let cancer dictate her life. If chemotherapy was agony, she would endure it. If surgery left scars, she would wear them as proof of survival. Sharon promised herself that she would show her children what true resilience looked like. She wanted them to remember her not as a victim but as a fighter who never surrendered. Every day she woke up determined to push through, no matter how weak she felt, no matter how hopeless the doctor's words sometimes sounded. Her refusal to bow down became her greatest weapon. Sharon turned her home into both a battlefield and a sanctuary. She let her children see her laugh, argue, and even work through exhaustion, teaching them that strength was not about hiding pain but about confronting it. For Sharon, the real battle was not only against cancer but against despair itself. And in that battle, she chose defiance. The treatments began quickly, and they were nothing short of brutal. Chemotherapy coursed through Sharon's body like poison, leaving her weak, nauseous, and trembling with exhaustion. Her once vibrant energy was stripped away. Her hair began to fall in clumps, and her reflection in the mirror often startled her. Yet even in those moments of raw vulnerability, she refused to surrender. She would put on her makeup, adjust her wig, and walk onto the set of The Osbournes with a smile that told the world she was still standing. Every infusion felt like a battle, but Sharon met it with clenched fists and unyielding resolve. When her body shook with chills, she whispered to herself that she would not be defeated. When she could barely eat, she reminded herself that she had survived worse storms. She drew strength from the thought of her children watching her, knowing that if she showed weakness, their fear would grow. So she chose to embody courage, even when it felt like a mask barely holding back despair. The physical toll was devastating, but Sharon's spirit blazed even brighter in defiance. Doctors told her to rest, but she insisted on continuing her work, on being present for her family, on living as though cancer had no power over her. For Sharon, each day was a test, and each day she endured was a victory. The illness may have stripped her body, but it could not take her will. That unbreakable will became her armor, carrying her through the agony of treatment and keeping hope alive in the darkest hours. Even as chemotherapy drained every ounce of energy from her body, Sharon refused to step out of the public eye. She understood that her family's show, The Osbournes, was more than entertainment. It was a window into their lives, and she would not allow cancer to close that window. Cameras captured her quick remarks, her laughter, and her command of the household. But what they did not capture was the struggle it took just to get out of bed and face another day. Sharon made a choice. She would not let the disease silence her voice or rob her of the life she had built. Producers worried that her illness would overshadow the show, but Sharon flipped the narrative. She spoke openly about her diagnosis, turning her personal battle into a source of strength for millions watching around the world. Fans who had admired her wit and toughness now saw something deeper, a woman facing death head on and daring it to break her. Letters poured in from people battling their own illnesses, thanking her for showing them that even in the darkest hours, dignity and determination could shine through. Balancing treatment with filming was a torment. Some days she could barely sit upright, her body aching from the chemical warfare raging inside her. Yet she insisted on keeping the cameras rolling, on proving that cancer might weaken her body but it could never claim her spirit. Sharon's career did not falter during her illness, it flourished, because she turned her suffering into a powerful reminder of resilience. In the face of disease, she transformed from a reality star into a symbol of survival. Inside the Osbourne household, the diagnosis cast a long, unshakable shadow. Kelly and Jack were still young, their lives already chaotic under the glare of fame, and now they were faced with the terrifying thought of losing their mother. Ozzy, battling his own demons, struggled to cope with the idea that the woman who had always saved him might not survive. Fear hung heavy in the air, but Sharon refused to let it consume her family. She made a deliberate choice to shield them from the worst of her suffering. When the pain was unbearable, she waited until the children were asleep to cry. When her energy was gone, she forced herself to smile, to make them laugh, to show them that their mother was still there. Sharon turned her fight into a lesson for her family. Life does not stop when tragedy strikes. It demands that you rise even higher. Her presence became the anchor that steadied them all. She encouraged Kelly to keep chasing her music, urged Jack to focus on his own battles with addiction, and reassured Ozzy that she would not abandon him. In truth, she was terrified, but she never let them see it. Sharon's willpower became a shield that protected her loved ones from the darkness threatening to swallow them whole. By standing strong for her family, she gave them the courage to stand strong for her. When the cameras shut down and the laughter faded, Sharon was left alone with the reality she had tried so hard to hide. The nights were the hardest. In the silence of her bedroom, stripped of makeup and performance, she felt the weight of the disease pressing down on her. Every ache reminded her that her body was fragile. Every shadow in the room seemed to whisper the possibility of death. Yet even in those moments, she refused to let fear win. She let the tears come, but once they dried, she told herself she would rise again in the morning. Isolation became both her enemy and her teacher. Alone, Sharon confronted her deepest fears, the fear of not seeing her children grow, the fear of leaving Ozzy to crumble without her, the fear of becoming just another sad story of someone lost too soon. But instead of allowing those fears to break her, she used them as motivation. She would not let her children remember her as a victim. She would fight until her last breath, if only to show them the meaning of resilience. It was in these quiet, private battles that Sharon's strength shone brightest. There were no cameras to capture her resolve, no audience to applaud her defiance. Only a woman, sick and exhausted, whispering to herself that tomorrow was still worth reaching for. The loneliness cut deeply, but her willpower burned deeper still, keeping her moving forward even when every instinct told her to stop. As if cancer were not enough, Sharon also faced the resurfacing of an older, more insidious battle. For decades, she had struggled with bulimia, hiding it beneath her polished image and razor-sharp tongue. The treatments for cancer stripped her body of strength and weight, but her mind replayed the cruel voice she had lived with since youth. The voice that told her she was never enough, never beautiful, never worthy. In the middle of fighting for her life, she also had to wrestle with the shame and exhaustion of her eating disorder. It would have been easy to let those voices drag her deeper into despair, but Sharon refused. She spoke openly, admitting her struggles to the public, instead of burying them in secrecy. By naming her demons, she robbed them of their power. She chose to confront the disorder not as a weakness, but as another battle in the long war for her survival. Her honesty became a weapon, turning personal pain into a message that others fighting similar wars were not alone. The clash between a body weakened by cancer and a mind haunted by old wounds could have broken her spirit, but instead it ignited her determination. Sharon did not allow herself to be defined by illness or disorder. She told herself that scars, both visible and hidden, were proof of survival. Every time she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw just frailty. She saw a warrior who had endured far more than most ever could, and still found the strength to carry on. While Sharon's own body was under siege, the man she loved was still drowning in his own chaos. Ozzy's addictions and fragile state meant that instead of leaning on him for support, Sharon often had to become his anchor, even as she herself was gasping for air. The cruel irony was undeniable. She was the patient, yet she found herself acting as the caretaker, pushing him toward sobriety, making sure he didn't unravel while her own strength was being drained drop by drop. There were moments when Sharon could barely stand after chemotherapy, yet she still gathered the energy to calm Ozzy's rages or hold him steady when he faltered. She should have been the one receiving comfort, but instead she gave it. She carried her pain quietly, choosing to protect him from seeing how close she was to collapse. To Sharon, love was not about convenience, it was about sacrifice, and she sacrificed everything to keep the man she had devoted her life to alive. This dual battle could have easily destroyed her spirit. Many would have walked away, choosing self-preservation over devotion. But Sharon was different. Her strength came not only from survival but from loyalty, from the promise she had made to herself that she would never abandon her family no matter how heavy the burden became. In fighting for Ozzy while fighting for herself, Sharon revealed the depth of her willpower. She was not just surviving cancer, she was proving that even at her weakest, she had the courage to hold two lives together when everything threatened to fall apart. There came nights when Sharon's strength seemed to vanish completely. The pain from chemotherapy was relentless, the exhaustion so deep, she felt her body was slipping away. Lying in a hospital bed, she imagined what it would be like if she simply stopped fighting. The thought of letting go whispered seductively in her mind, no more pain, no more endless needles, no more waking up every day to another battle she wasn't sure she could win. For a fleeting moment, surrender seemed almost merciful. But then, in that same moment, she thought of her children. She pictured Kelly's laughter, Jack's struggles, and Amy's quiet determination. She saw Ozzy's face, worn and fragile, utterly incapable of surviving without her. The vision of her family standing by her grave filled her with a fire more powerful than any treatment. She could not leave them not like that, not when they still needed her. The tears on her cheeks were not just from fear, but from a fierce resolve rising within her heart. Sharon made a decision that night. If cancer wanted to take her, it would have to fight for every inch of her soul. She would not give up easily. She would not be remembered as someone who surrendered. She would stand as an example to her children that true strength is forged in the moments when giving up feels easier. From that moment on, Sharon no longer saw herself as a victim of illness. She saw herself as a warrior, scarred but unbroken, prepared to fight until her last breath if that was what it took. After months of agony, surgeries, and nights where death felt close enough to touch, Sharon finally heard the words she had been praying for. She was in remission. The battle with colon cancer had not claimed her life. She had endured the treatments, withstood the fear, and come out on the other side. But survival was not a return to what she once was. It was the beginning of something new. Sharon emerged, scarred, weakened, and changed, yet stronger in ways she had never imagined. Her body bore the marks of war. The weight loss, the lingering fatigue, and the quiet toll on her immune system became permanent reminders of what she had endured. She even chose to undergo preventive surgery years later, removing her breasts to reduce the risk of cancer returning. These choices were not made lightly. They were acts of defiance, proof that she would rather take control of her destiny than wait helplessly for illness to strike again. Every scar became a badge of her resilience, a silent testimony to the fact that she refused to let fear dictate her life. But perhaps the greatest transformation was not physical, it was spiritual. Sharon began to speak publicly about her journey, sharing the darkest moments with an honesty that shocked some but inspired millions. She was no longer just the sharp-tongued matriarch on reality television. She had become a voice for survival, a symbol for anyone who felt powerless in the face of disease. By showing the world her vulnerability, Sharon revealed her true power. She proved that courage is not about never breaking, but about breaking and still finding the will to rise again. Surviving cancer did not mean Sharon was free from its shadow. In the years that followed, her health became fragile, her body reminding her constantly of the war it had fought. She endured dizzy spells, fainting episodes, and alarming weight loss that often sent her back to hospital beds she thought she had left behind. Every checkup carried a silent fear that the disease might return. Even in remission, cancer lingered like an echo, a ghost that never truly let her go. Yet Sharon refused to let fragility define her. She spoke openly about her struggles, not as a plea for sympathy but as a declaration of truth. Survival is messy, painful, and often imperfect. She told her children and fans that strength was not about being untouchable, it was about showing up, even when your body wanted to give up. Each time her health faltered, she reminded herself that she had already stared death in the face once and would not be intimidated again. Her willpower became her compass. Instead of retreating into silence, she kept working, kept speaking, kept living, as though each day was both borrowed and sacred. Sharon knew she was no longer the indestructible matriarch the world had once imagined, but she embraced her vulnerabilities as part of her story. With every stumble, she stood up again, proving that resilience is not a single triumph but a lifelong commitment. Her body might have grown weaker, but her spirit only grew more unyielding. Just as Sharon was trying to rebuild her strength after cancer, another cruel twist of fate came crashing down. Ozzy, the man she had carried through decades of chaos, was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Suddenly, the roles were reversed. Though she was still fragile from her own battles, Sharon became his caretaker. Every day brought new challenges, organizing his medications, helping him move across a room, standing beside him during surgeries, and protecting him from the glare of the press that refused to let him fade quietly. There were times Sharon's own body betrayed her. Dizziness would force her to sit down. Exhaustion would overwhelm her. Yet she pushed those limits aside because Ozzy needed her more than ever. She often said that she could not allow herself the luxury of weakness. Her husband's survival depended on her strength, and so she rose each morning, not for herself, but for him, determined to give back the devotion she had once demanded of him. Her resilience became the glue holding their world together. Sharon fought not only the decline of her husband but also the despair that threatened to swallow them both. She spoke publicly with fierce honesty about the pain of watching Ozzy lose his independence, admitting that it broke her heart but never broke her spirit. Through the long nights and endless hospital visits, Sharon showed what true love looks like when stripped of glamour, devotion, sacrifice, and an unshakable will to stand by someone even when your own body begs you to rest. No amount of strength, no years of preparation could have steeled Sharon for the moment Ozzy's voice went silent forever. For 41 years, through chaos and fame, through violence and redemption, through sickness and survival, she had built her life around him. And then, in a single breath, that life collapsed. The man who had been her greatest burden and her greatest love was gone, leaving her in a silence heavier than any illness she had ever faced. The grief struck her body as hard as it did her heart. Friends whispered that she seemed to age overnight. Her already fragile health grew weaker, her frame thinner, her steps slower. The emotional weight translated into physical decline, as though her body itself could not bear the loss. Sharon had survived cancer by focusing on the love she might lose, but when Ozzy was truly gone, there was nothing left to fight for. The emptiness became another kind of disease, one without treatment, one that spread through every part of her being. And yet, even in the depths of mourning, Sharon clung to the same willpower that had carried her through before. She forced herself to rise each morning, to speak, to remember that her children still needed her, that her story could not end in despair. She channeled her grief into remembrance, telling the world of Ozzy's legacy, making sure his voice would never be silenced completely. The pain was unbearable, but her resolve remained. If she had survived death once through cancer, she would survive it again through grief. This was the hardest war of her life, and still, she refused to let it claim her. At 72, Sharon Osbourne carries the weight of battles that would have broken almost anyone else. Cancer left her body scarred and vulnerable, a constant reminder that life is fragile. Years of surgeries, preventive operations, and relentless medical checks have taken their toll. The grief of losing Ozzy compounded that fragility, draining her energy in ways no doctor could measure. Friends and family have noticed how she has grown thinner, how fatigue comes quicker, how hospital visits have become an unwelcome rhythm of her later years. And yet, Sharon does not allow these limitations to define her. Each time her body falters, she leans on the fierce willpower that saved her before. She refuses to stay in bed longer than she must, forces herself to walk, to move, to live, even when pain gnaws at her bones. She speaks openly about her health, not with self-pity but with the candor that has always defined her. By sharing her struggles, she strips them of their power, transforming weakness into strength, grief into testimony. The public often sees a woman marked by loss, but Sharon insists on being remembered for her resilience. She has said that if her story can inspire even one person to keep fighting, then every scar has been worth it. Though her body may now betray her more easily, her spirit burns with the same defiance that once carried her through cancer's cruelty. Sharon knows her years are fewer ahead than behind, but she meets them head-on, determined to show that even in decline, dignity and courage can still shine. Looking back on her journey, Sharon Osbourne does not see a life defined only by suffering, though pain has shaped nearly every chapter. She sees a story of survival, a testament to the human will to endure when everything seems lost. Cancer tried to take her body, grief tried to shatter her spirit, and time itself has worked to slow her down, but through it all, Sharon has refused to vanish quietly. Her resilience is her legacy, the unspoken message she leaves behind for her children, her grandchildren, and for anyone who has watched her story unfold. She reminds the world that strength is not about never breaking, it is about breaking and rising again, scarred but still unbowed. Sharon has shown that even when illness strips you bare and loss steals the love that anchored you, life can still hold meaning. Her willingness to share her pain openly has turned her private wounds into lessons for others, teaching that dignity can be found not in perfection, but in perseverance. In the end, Sharon's greatest triumph is not in managing Ozzy's career, not in reality television fame, not even in surviving cancer. It is in proving that a woman can endure unimaginable trials and still stand, carrying her scars with pride. After the applause fades and the spotlight shifts away, Sharon Osbourne remains a symbol of courage, living proof that even in the face of death, despair, and loneliness, the human spirit can still choose to fight, to love, and to live. Even as the years weigh heavily on her shoulders, Sharon Osbourne refuses to see her story as finished. She understands that the spotlight has dimmed, that the applause which once surrounded her family has quieted, but she does not measure her worth in cheers or headlines. Instead, she measures it in survival. Each morning she opens her eyes is another victory, another chance to prove that pain may slow her, but it will never silence her. She spends her days reflecting on the lessons she fought to learn the hardest way possible. She tells her children that true strength is not in conquering the world, but in conquering yourself when despair tries to pull you under. She shares openly with others facing illness, reminding them that even the smallest steps forward are acts of courage. Sharon knows that she is not the invincible woman the public once believed her to be, but perhaps that is her greatest gift, the courage to show her fragility without shame. Though her health is fragile, her determination burns brighter than ever. She has lived through cancer, through betrayal, through the unimaginable loss of her partner, and she still stands. Sharon's journey is not a perfect story, but it is a profoundly human one, carved out of scars, tears, and iron will. Long after the applause has faded, she continues to embody what resilience truly means. Not the absence of struggle, but the relentless choice to rise again, no matter how many times life tries to keep you down. After everything she has endured, the poison of chemotherapy, the loneliness of late-night hospital rooms, the shame of hidden disorders, the endless caretaking, and the unbearable silence left by Sharon Osbourne still rises each day. She no longer measures her life in sold-out arenas or television ratings. Instead, she measures it in moments of simple grace, a conversation with her children, the laughter of her grandchildren, the quiet strength of surviving one more sunrise. She knows her body will never be as strong as it once was, and grief will never leave her entirely. But Sharon has transformed those wounds into a story that resonates far beyond her own life. She has become proof that even when the world strips you down, when loss tears your heart apart, and when illness leaves your body fragile, the spirit can still remain unbroken. Her scars are not signs of weakness, but medals of endurance, each one a reminder that she chose to keep fighting when surrender would have been easier. The world may remember Ozzy as the Prince of Darkness, but Sharon's legacy is carved from a different kind of light, the light of resilience, sacrifice, and defiance in the face of despair. Her life tells us that strength is not about never falling, but about rising again and again, no matter how heavy the weight. And as long as Sharon Osbourne continues to breathe, she is living proof that survival itself can be the greatest triumph of all.